Okay, thank you all so much for joining today's webinar. We are going to be discussing 2021 trends in supply chain. Before we get started, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items with you all. There will be time at the end of the webinar for a Q&A, but if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, or feel free to send a chat to XPERO Internal, the host. We are recording today's session, and I will be sending out a follow-up email this week with the recording. It'll also be posted on our website. And if you have any questions or issues during the webinar, please don't hesitate to reach out to me as well, XPERO Internal, and I will be happy to help troubleshoot any issues you may have. With that, we will go ahead and get started. We are going to kick off today's presentation with Brian Thompson from XPERO.
Fantastic. Thank you, Laura. Welcome all. Glad to be here with you today. Thanks for taking the time out. My name is Brian Thompson. I work for a company called XPERO, and I'm involved with our ventures activity. And over the last few years, that has been especially focused in our supply chain practice. I am excited to have with me today Bill Marslock, the founder and CEO of our partner Chain Sequence, and I'll let him introduce himself in a second here. But we also have with us my partner in crime, Chris LaCava, who's a longtime user experience guru and now the head of product here at XPERO as well. For those of you that haven't connected with XPERO before, I'll give you the 30,000 view, for 30,000-foot view. XPERO is a 20-year-old product development and consulting firm. We build software and do data science work and data analytics products for expert users primarily. We've helped a lot of companies and a lot of industries build their own new solutions, modernize their old solutions, find insights in their data, and in some cases we use products and toolkits to help them in those efforts. And then specifically in the supply chain space, we have a product that helps with capacity planning and scenario modeling. We also help people build visibility and logistics products from scratch. We've built machine learning and data science capabilities in this domain, especially around forecasting and scheduling and just general optimization. There's also some specialized things we're known for, like graph technology and interacting with large, highly connected data sets. And with that, I'll let Bill introduce himself.
Thanks, Brian. As Brian said, my name is Bill Marslock, and I'm founder of Chain Sequence. Chain Sequence specializes in supply chain planning and S&OP planning processes. We've been deploying these solutions in multiple industries with client partners located all over the world. We focus exclusively on three primary areas. The first one is in supply chain planning. We have a pretty broad definition of what supply chain planning means to us. That's everything from the front end of demand planning to the back end of order management, fulfillment, and everything in between. We provide education on foundational principles. We assess existing processes, and we develop new solutions that fit the strategies for our client partners. On the S&OP side, we also develop and deploy unique S&OP programs for our clients, and also as well conduct assessments and education on existing S&OP processes. The last category that we focus on is process to system integration, and that's where our partnership with XPERO comes in. We are focused on the business process side, but as our client partners deploy technical solutions, we'll liaise between our client partner and the solution provider to make sure that the business requirements of the process itself is incorporated into the technology solution.
Great, thanks, Bill. This is Chris. Thanks for the intro, Brian. This is the agenda of topics that we're going to talk about today. We're going to start off with just kind of a macro view of what the geopolitics look like in 2021 and how that affects supply chains, along with issues around tariffs and stimulus. Then we're going to get into some details around collaboration and integration between systems and linking back basically the network of networks around supply chain and what the implications we think are going to come down the pike in 2021. Then we're going to talk about simplification and agility and how we see trends basically from 2020 into 2021 affecting those areas. And then finally, we're going to end on a few topics around technology and how we see emerging technology addressing some of the issues that we're going to cover today. So I'm going to jump into just a high-level view of some of the macro trends globally that we saw at the end of 2020 and how that's dovetailing into 2021. So what a lot of the predictions are saying now is that 2021 is going to be a recovery year based on what we experienced in 2020 with the pandemic and some other disruption issues that happened earlier in that year. But the recovery is going to be uneven, and we're already seeing early signs of that, where China and India are actually recovering at a higher rate and are expected to recoup a lot more based on IMF predictions throughout the year 2021. Europe and the US will bounce back, but it's going to be a little bit more delayed since we were affected a bit more by the pandemic, and that's going to continue to be a disruption, and we're seeing this now and some of the unprecedented disruptions that we've seen between supply and demand. And this means that our historical supply and demand models are not going to hold water for 2021. We're going to have to basically come up with new models around what supply looks like and how we forecast demand and how we predict what that's going to look like throughout the year and how we plan capacity. And that also means that new channels are going to open up. So we're going to see, and we're already seeing this, that the supply and demand channels are realigning basically. Instead of east-west hemispheres, we're seeing a lot of north-south style patterns to basically build resiliency. So when the pandemic first hit, for example, in Asia, it disrupted a lot of the supply networks, and then by the time a lot of that stuff got straightened out, a lot of the demand that was predicted was old information. So what does this mean moving forward? It means that that we're gonna need to have greater visibility into supply and demand, and specifically in planning, but also in operations. It's going to be key basically to gain the agility we need because those historical models are no longer applicable, or at least we can't trust them completely. So to build resiliency, we're going to basically need to anticipate and proactively deal with some of these disruptions into 2021 because the recovery is going to be asymmetrical. So that's a global overview. Next, I'm going to jump down to what it looks like domestically in the U.S. So as I said before, compared to other regions, the U.S. is still dealing with a lot of disruption comparatively. And the new administration has signaled that they are putting in measures to basically combat this. So as the stimulus money works through the economy, it's clear that economic recovery is going to have to focus on growth. And there have been several cabinet appointments, as well as new President Biden saying that at least signaling that U.S. manufacturing is basically going to be a central point in this economic growth. And people have even said, some people anyway, have said that this may go as far as contemplating a Roosevelt-era New Deal approach to stimulus. And you can see this in a couple things that Biden has done already. He signed an executive order basically called the Buy American Act, which closes a lot of loopholes around federal purchasing and drastically tamps down on waivers to go outside of the US when obtaining raw material, equipment, and infrastructure for federal purchasing, basically. And this is basically a stepping stone into what a lot of people look at as basically stimulating U.S. Growth through manufacturing and infrastructure investment. And so what does this mean for manufacturing particularly? It means that capacity is going to come online here, and that is definitely a positive thing. But as we spun down capacity through the pandemic, it's going to be hard to wake that up in a non-disruptive way. It also means that there are going to be new supplier relationships and new competition for the suppliers that are out there and the raw materials that are out there, especially if we're sourcing domestically. It means that there's going to be pressure around compliance, and the Buy American Act is one measure that around compliance, but there's going to be more, and that means that that there's going to be more housekeeping and more accounting involved to make sure that you can meet that compliance. There's also going to be more opportunity if there's government spending, but I think the salient point is that legacy systems that were built on older models aren't going to be able to nimbly and agilely react to a lot of these changes. And so these older systems that are in place, both technology-based and just procedural, are going to be outstripped along with the optimization models that they're built on. And so if we look at some major topics of investment, both globally and in the United States, it's clear that a lot of it is going to be in infrastructure, and specifically in green energy. A lot of those industries, because of technology advancements, are poised to boom anyway. They were a little stunted because of 2020 disruption, but all indications are they're coming back. So after losing a little bit of momentum, 5G, for example, is going to resume what the predicted pace was in 2021 by all accounts. Renewable power is surging all over the place, but especially in Europe. And this chart here shows that it actually overtook fossil fuels for the first time last year, and that trend is predicted to just keep rising. There are emerging technologies in battery manufacturing and also solar in the US. So that is going to account for a lot of incentives as well as a lot of novel technology. And there's popular support for a lot of this investment, especially in infrastructure. 87% of the American population basically supports increased spending on infrastructure and transportation. So how does this roll down to supply chain? There's a lot of things that we already mentioned around just different opportunities and challenges around sourcing material. But in addition to that, there's going to be novel forms of distribution. There's going to be new opportunities for new tech startups. So a lot of times when there's a stimulus around certain technologies, you see a lot of innovators move to that space, and we believe that's already happening, but we think that's only going to increase. And there's going to be more because of 5G and some of the other technological infrastructure. There's going to be more of a migration than there already is to things such as IoT and real-time analytics. And Brian will talk a little bit more about some of the technology backing that. But I think that's coming into, or at least poised to come into, its golden age. And we'll see that technology be more and more ubiquitous in more and more places in manufacturing and beyond. Over to you, Bill.
Right. Yep, thanks. Hopefully I've better connection now. So there's a lot of things that are going on in the world, as Chris had mentioned, with the changes in the geopolitics and a country's politics and its effect on relationships. Everybody is still reeling from the COVID-19. The tariffs that come and go, especially with the former administration, and as relationships change and as world leaders change positions around the world, the tensions flare up, they go away. So it's something that's always around, And this year it's really has increased, something that we really have to take a look at. So, some of the implications of this are, there's always tariffs around, but they're increasing. So, what are the implications that we have to take a look at? Chris talked about the U.S. is still kind of in a harder state than others, but our supply chain is on the other side of the world as well. And last year, there was a lot of difficulty in getting components and materials overseas. I recently remodeled a kitchen, and I had a heck of a time trying to get a refrigerator. Refrigeration was a very difficult constraint. So when we look at the products that we have to take a look at our entire supply chain network and where are all those nodes, whether we're manufacturing, it's a distribution, our transportation lanes. We need to take a proactive approach and look at how is that set up and be aware of the disruptions within that, whether it's transportation delays, because early on last year, when all travel was shut down, nothing was moving at all. As things slow down, how can we at least be aware of that and take that into account so that when we make commitments to our customers, we can get that product to them. We've also have cost associated with that. Where possible, if we can airship it versus overseas to minimize some of that, there's cost with that, it degrades our margin. So we need to be aware of that and plan for that accordingly. And then the other big thing is we need to have a good program that periodically looks at our entire supply chain network and is constantly looking at how can we optimize that? How can we reduce that perceived lead time to make sure that we're getting the product when we need it? So all of these factors, some of these things we can't predict, but being able to look at that and have some of that visibility allows us to at least have some chance of mitigating some of those risks. And Chris talked about the technology and the analytics, and Brian's going to talk a little bit more about it as well. But from a supply chain perspective, I won't talk about all the technologies. Technologies are always advancing, but the one thing that is changing is the incorporation of that into the supply chain planning. It's really come into play over the last year or so as we incorporate that technology to help get a better plan on the supply chain side. So when we look at our demand planning, we're going to be able to use those technologies to be more predictive rather than just doing historical forecasting. When we look at the area of capacity modeling, and capacity can be in any form, it could be tools, it could be human labor, it could be warehouse space. Being able to understand that and use the analytics to make sure that as we look out over time, that we can identify potential constraints before they occur and take the appropriate action, whether that is onboarding new suppliers for transportation, increasing warehouse space, increasing capacity in the warehouse, on the floor, or increasing labor. If we don't have visibility to that, that constraint's going to occur and obviously going to impact us. Inventory management is also really important. And inventory in terms of what we hold, how much we hold, where we hold it physically, but also where we hold it from a product design standpoint. If we hold everything in finished goods, we have much less flexibility. And if we're driving it on a forecast that is potentially wrong, we're going to be in more trouble. So we'll talk a little bit more later about postponement strategies, but inventory in terms of where we hold it, how we hold it, becomes really important. That's where the analytics can really help us in that area. And then the last piece is the supply demand optimization. When we look at the balancing of the supply and the demand, all supply, whether it's raw materials, finished goods, or everything in between, the analytics of this new technology really improves our ability to meet the demand and balance our supply with that demand in the best possible way. And that proactive artificial intelligence and the planning and all the technology that comes with that is an area that will really improve the supply chain and its ability to meet the customer demands and overcome a lot of these issues that are out there today.
Okay, so thanks, Bill. We're going to jump into integration and collaboration, talk about supplier visibility, as well as something I think that supply chain leaders and folks within that domain have struggled with for a long time, which is collaboration and being able to see end to end, basically the supply chain from raw material all the way through to customers. And the example I have here is the DQSA Act that takes into effect in 2023. Something that's a couple years away, but we see our colleagues and customers in pharmaceutical manufacturing struggling with this now. For those of you who don't know, it's basically legislation that requires these manufacturers to keep a full chain of custody from raw material all the way through to point of sale. It's a Herculean task from a data acquisition perspective, but just collaboration and coordination is key. And it's a real salient example, I think, of something that is felt in a lot of industries throughout the supply chain, which is you may have visibility within your four walls or your manufacturing process and distribution process, but getting signals from the point of sale back, and then also on the other side of the supply chain from the actual supply inception is hard, if not impossible in some cases. And as we talked about all the other disruptions that we dealt with in 2020, this one is one that was particularly painful because we couldn't get those insights basically into things in real time. And I've actually pulled together a couple of use cases, Brian, if you go to the next slide, of situations where we actually used our technology to help in some of these end-to-end collaboration and visibility scenarios. So in the first case, we worked with a life sciences manufacturer to basically allow them to plan through their rough cut planning cycle. So they were looking at 36 months out, but they were also looking very early in the cycle and up to current, month plus one timeframes to basically manage things at a regional level as soon as they saw disruption from a global level, and in real time, basically being able to make shifts and changes, mitigation strategies in capacity planning, as well as inventory management and run scenarios. The system would give them recommendations. And they could collaborate with both stakeholders to show those different options, but then also deal with schedulers at the factory level, even proactively before things became an issue. This is something that historically meant that they went through a bunch of siloed latent systems, pulled together a bunch of information, dropped it in a spreadsheet, and it took someone a week's worth of work to work through whether the plan was going to be feasible. In this situation, we cut that down to minutes, and planners were actually able to see this stuff in real time, and were able to collaborate since the system was web-based and able to be shared. The next example is on the same type of technology, but in this case, it was right at the beginning of COVID-19 when a crop sciences manufacturer basically couldn't get insight into disruptions from China based on supply that was coming in. And they have long lead times normally, and it was hard for them to be able to adjust to this. So they basically used our system to create a triage war room to figure out how many of their downstream materials were going to be affected as news was coming out in real time around disruption right at the beginning of the pandemic. So again, this is a same kind of situation where they basically couldn't have done this with their siloed systems. They basically pulled this into a system that we implemented to be able to get real time feedback. And it's notable that prior to that, they were actually practicing inventory reduction and just-in-time lean manufacturing. So they didn't have a ton of safety stock on hand. And this system allowed them to fortify their manufacturing process, basically by giving them visibility and allowing them to run those recommendations and collaborate across regions, but still keep relatively lean. So they didn't have to bloat safety stock, even if they had the material on hand to do so. Over to you, Bill.
All right, thanks, Chris. Take myself off of mute. So when we look at the issues around what we're looking at, integrated planning becomes more important than ever as organizations are trying to maximize performance and mitigate risk in the current conditions. So cross-organization collaboration becomes extremely important. Finger pointing doesn't do any good, communication does. So being aware of what the customers need, being aware of the constraints that we have, being able to balance that delivery becomes really important. And one of the vehicles to do that is S&OP, and I'll talk about that in a minute. How we measure ourselves and try to be a little bit proactive on things. Everybody looks at KPIs and how we're performing metrics, but we really need to move to more predictive KPIs rather than historical KPIs that tell us how bad we did in the past. We want to look at what's trending and how can we address those issues before they actually occur. So developing a KPI evaluation and management program becomes really important, with an emphasis on predictive indicators rather than historical indicators. When we look at the issues with being able to balance and the demand and constraints that occur, in the COVID times, constraints were extremely severe, but constraints always do occur. And we want to be able to understand when they occur, who's going to get what product. We can't just say that our top customer gets everything and the other ones go away, because we could potentially eliminate customers from our base. So having a segmentation strategy that proactively prioritizes both customers and demand, so that when we do have a constraint that occurs, we've got a proactive approach to optimizing those resources and supply and getting it to those customers and supporting those products that are most important to us, but kind of spread the pain a little bit so that one segment of customer is left without no product at all. And part of that ties into, and Chris talked about this, with the proactive scenario planning, being able to read the tea leaves, if you will, and identify scenarios that could happen, so that in the event that they do happen, you've been prepared for them. You know what you need to do in order to address those. And part of that, again, we come back to that, is tying into system usage to use that technology. As Chris said, it's easy to have somebody look at spreadsheets, but we don't have a week to react to that. So we want to be able to utilize that technology to be more agile, to be able to react to those constraints and issues that occur in a way that we can address them. Excuse me. And then the S&OP, as I said, is a great top level program to tie everything together, because it looks at all organizations, it looks at all processes, and it looks at a horizon that's far enough out in time where we have some time to react to it. So being able to address those things, being able to identify some of those issues that can occur, the S&OP program, Sales and Operations Planning Program, will help you to coordinate all the activities across all the organizations. And then on the supplier side, integration and collaboration with the suppliers is extremely important. We can't deliver a product if we don't have the materials to produce it. And again, over the last 12 months, we saw extreme shortages in materials, either because the materials were not available or transportation lanes were entirely shut down and we couldn't move those products to get it to the manufacturing locations. So the supplier visibility and communication becomes really important. Being able to proactively understand potential constraints at our suppliers, and having that constant communication, as Chris said, using that technology to have real-time visibility to be able to understand where's that product in the overall supply chain network. On the supplier reliability, of developing a good audit program so that you can periodically look at your suppliers and make sure that there's compliance and reliability within the supplier. If suppliers aren't performing well, you want to be able to know that early on and mitigate that by replacing them with other suppliers as well that may be more reliable. On lead time, customers want everything immediately. It's an exaggeration, but being able to look at how can we manage that lead time and reduce it. And there are certain constraints to that in terms of how much inventory we can hold. There's physical constraints of producing the product. So we want to be able to look at that, excuse me, be able to look at our actual lead time and look at how are we holding inventory, where are we holding it, can we bring in more suppliers, and being able to reduce that overall perceived lead time. On new suppliers, so having that supplier reliability program will help us to monitor the suppliers that we have, but you also want to have a good supplier onboarding program so that you can qualify new suppliers and get them in a good position right at the onset, so that those rules and contracts are in place. And then the last way to mitigate some of that is to understand secondary sourcing so that you don't have all your eggs in one nest, that we can have some alternate sourcing. Granted, it's not feasible to have secondary sourcing for everything, but it's definitely for key components that are critical to your product, making sure that you've got some secondary sourcing to mitigate some of those disruptions that may have occurred. Chris?
Okay, so now we're going to move on to simplification and agility. And for this, I'm going to hand it over to Brian to kick off.
Thanks. So today, most of us are running some form of a just-in-time process, and that process relies on established inventory policies, safety stock levels, lead times, transit modes, transit times, a whole assortment of constraints that we typically have as pretty fixed in our models. But with the current level of disruption, most of these things are different. Container pricing is way up, container and airline capacity is down. You know, some of these basic constraints are just no longer constant. And so the plans need to be more agile than ever before. And in the meantime, while that's going on, both supply and demand models are shifting. So on the supply side, we have businesses, industries, and countries' strategic interests at stake. And then that's driving, sourcing to change. So we're moving in general from lowest cost global regions to, more domestic and nearshore locations. And then on the demand side, we have a downturn, we have community spread of a virus. Demand planning is difficult. It's unpredictable. It needs to be more regionalized and market focused. So what do you do in the face of all of this? How do you optimize chaos, so to speak? And it's agility, right? How can we quickly align demand and supply? It's visibility, like Chris and Bill have talked about, right? We have to know what's going on in order to then react to it. And another thing that can help is simplification. So if we can simplify our product portfolio, that would make it easier to manage in times of uncertainty.
All right. And what I'll talk about in these concepts for postponement, platform, product design have been around for a while, but it's really something that needs to be addressed. But it's also pretty difficult for organizations to take this into account. As Brian said, SKU rationalization and portfolio management are one means of being able to simplify your supply chain. I'm a retail manufacturer. I've got a kitchen appliance. Do I really need 24 different colors of that appliance to support the market? So you have to look at your portfolio and balance out what does the market really need against what are you really willing to support, because the complexity of all those different colors implies a much higher level of inventory. And if your forecast accuracy is low, you're going to have inventory implications. So SKU rationalization and portfolio management are something that should be an ongoing basis and should really be focused on, especially as we go forward. Another way to minimize that impact is a postponement strategy, and some of that's going to depend on the design of the product. So that graph on the left hand side, you can there are various ways of postponing. Can I hold the product just at component level? Can I hold it at a sub-assembly? Can I hold it at a prepackaged level? Can I hold it just before in the warehouse, just before it ships? And every point that you hold it can potentially minimize finished good inventory, but also can reduce that lead time and delivery of that product to the customer. So holding it up further up the line, closer to start of manufacturing, gives you flexibility, because I can hold it here and I can move it into one product or another. The closer you get to finished good, that's all that you have. You've got a finished good. Yes, you may be able to have some packaging options where I put some accessories in the box before it finally goes out the door. So every level closer to start of manufacturing gives you much more flexibility and can reduce some of the lead time in terms of getting that product out the door. The other bigger issue, bigger challenge is product platform design. As engineers develop new products, they're engineers. They want to have everything new. I want to have the latest and greatest and bleeding edge technology. But designing new components and new modules that go into those products, being able to leverage technology from before, do we really need to re-engineer everything? Or can we share some of those components as the products move to the new design? So again, that takes a very proactive approach for that future product design, either to take into account, I want to be able to hold semi-finished goods at an earlier stage rather than all finished goods. And I want to be able to share those components across multiple products. But the benefits can reduce some of that lead time to the product, and obviously reduces, maximizes the component flexibility, but increases the simplification around that. So two strategies, really important, not so easy to do, but something that we really need to focus on.
So thanks, Bill. Let's talk technology now. I thought it's worth probably spending a few minutes to see and look at what some of the other folks in the industry, especially other services organizations, are saying. And one thing that I saw is that McKinsey is reporting that many organizations over the course of 2020 were moving at 20-25 times faster than the executives thought possible in their pursuit of technology and digitization. And that many of those expect that some of that accelerated pace will continue into this year. So we expect these sorts of trends to continue. And just anecdotally from an XPERO standpoint, we over the course of the short period so far this year are talking to more people than we have in previous months about specifically about their digitization plans. So it's clearly top of mind for a lot of folks. And then on the other side here, Deloitte is seeing greater interest in the capture and ultimately the mining of large data volumes. And these are both structured and unstructured data sets. And most of that, is with the key objective to better understand a few things, right? Like customers, as an example, right? We want to better understand customers. We want to better understand the demand signals associated with them in order to be able to predict and respond both to the specific customer needs, their unique needs, and ultimately the demand fluctuations. from a specific technology standpoint, the most common theme that we see, it's we can see it going backwards as well, but it continues to revolve around AI. There's AI at the edge, and that helps us increase efficiency by processing information closer to the users. Ultimately, we're reducing latency and we're accelerating the time to the insights that are produced by the models. And that's especially helpful where the factories or the plants or even the individual devices are operating in remote locations where that latency is an issue and it needs to happen on the edge. And then, one of the areas that we get called on the most is around AI or ML operations. And you can see that here in terms of AI engineering or industrialized AI. At XPERO, we typically refer to that as ML ops. But this is where we move from really interesting, potentially valuable models that are running on local data scientists' notebooks to fully productionized systems, right? In order for that to happen, we need to have data pipelines with CI/CD. We need to have automated training and validation, monitoring, interpretability, active learning. We have to have a whole assortment of infrastructure in place to support that. So where does this fit? If you haven't interacted with us much before, we have a whole slew of information on our website, lots of in-depth on AI and operations, and you can find them in the resource menu under gallery, talks, webinars. You can even search for them in blogs. But what I'd like to do is focus on a couple really small areas within this enormous context of AI, and I think one of those areas that is starting to get more attention, but maybe still doesn't have enough, is with regard to where AI and humans can and probably should intersect. One of our founders, Lynn Pozick, did a great talk at a CTO summit, and you can find that through the link, or you can find that through our website. But for today, I'm just going to hit on a couple super high level pieces, right? We see here at the bottom this layer of data. We're all probably used to and maybe use the phrase often, garbage in, garbage out. If data is bad, AI models and the outcomes are bad, and in most cases, they're actually useless. So it's really important in periodic, quality control checks of the data lineage, and of the model results is something that people can help with. So that's a great area for them to be involved. I'll move up to the visibility and traceability. If we can't see how it works, is it right? Having people reviewing the actual results on a regular basis is a great gut check. And especially if those people are the subject matter experts in that particular area. These people can often easily determine if the data's changed, and if it has, are the outcomes still in the realm of the possible? Are they expected? This is good feedback to have in these models. And at the highest level here in system use, we believe this is a historically missed opportunity. User feedback drives model improvements and ultimately accuracy and trust. So this is about linking the user interface actions to actual AI operations workflows to capture the implicit and explicit user feedback and make it easy for the end users to offer their feedback and make selections that ultimately drive model behavior. And as you might guess, the combination of AI and people has shown to improve the accuracy over time. As more feedback is provided by the subject matter experts, the data scientists, the accuracy increases. And in addition to that, there are cost savings, right? The optimal solution is a balance. If you're on the side of too much manual activity, there's the time and cost associated with that. If you're on the side of too little manual activity, you're potentially losing the opportunity to add efficiency. So there's a balance here, and with that balance, your overall costs can ultimately come down. So another quick topic I want to touch on is in what's being termed as explainable AI. This is another way to increase visibility. One of the challenges in AI is that we don't know what the AI is thinking or why the model results are what they are. And so very often we're presented with results and we're not trusting or ready to use them on account of that. So in the top screenshot here, you see our planning system. You see a baseline on the left side and a scenario on the right side. The system is generating recommendations for the planners to act on. That's what's happening here. There are some ways to improve the plan and be more efficient and deliver more product at the right times. And in the bottom, we see an interface that's less intended for those planners, but more intended for the actual data scientists. And this is what allows us to interact, to see which machines are causing a drag on our production schedule, where our bottlenecks are. But it also allows the users to identify where models are correct and incorrect. And this is what helps us improve that efficiency. So explainable AI is often referred to as AI interpretability. And again, you can find a whole assortment of talks and blog posts, many of them by our head of data science, Graham Kanzel, on our website. If you're interested into that, we're happy to talk more about it with you. So with that, we have a little bit of time left. I want to make sure that we spend some time addressing any questions that come up, and I'll ask Laura to see if we've had any questions.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. That was great information. We did have a few come through. Proactive product and customer allocations were mentioned. How would you go about allocating product to customers?
So you base it on a set of criteria and understand what's important to you, balancing that with what's important to the customer. You don't want to be one-sided, that it completely degrades your margin or it forces you to hold inventory. So when you look at what's important, you look at the size of the customer, how much business they do with you, the margins on that product, the relationship that you have with that customer. So there's a series of factors, that criteria that you would look at, and then you define a scoring model that says, based on the individual factors of these, I would understand what is really important to me. But it's not a binary, you're important and you're not important, because there are degrees of importance. As we said earlier, that if there's a constraint, we can't just give it to one portion of our customer base and let the other one, because you do that enough times, you're going to lose your customers. So you need to be able to share the pain and spread that out. And that criteria, based on the type of product, what the product is and what it means to you and the customer and who the customer is, will balance that out. And it's not a complete solution, but it will minimize the amount of effort that you have to go through to do that allocation. Once you've done that preliminary allocation, now you can go back and look at, maybe one customer isn't getting enough and there's a specific reason, and you can work with your customers, and one customer may be willing to give up some to help you out to supply the other one. So it gives you a starting point, a proactive starting point to balance out that constraint, and then you can deal with the exceptions. But you don't want to deal with everything as an exception. You want to deal with the exceptions.
Great, thank you so much for that, Bill. The other one that came through was, we have an S&OP process, but our forecasts are still very poor. What is the point if we keep driving the wrong supply?
Well, forecasts are never fully right. And as we've all talked about over the course of this past hour, how technology is definitely going to be able to help us with that. But with a forecast even with a forecast that's wrong, that's moving towards more right, we have other things in the supply chain that we can do to minimize the impact of that. With the postponement and holding inventory, that gives us some flexibility with a wrong forecast, that forecasts are at a finished good level, but if I can use those components to other demand that came through, that minimizes some of the impact. So it may appear to be discouraging, but the S&OP process, again, as that top level, brings all the organizations together, and we can balance that out where the puts and takes of the error in the forecast can be offset by how we've designed the product and where we hold our inventory.
Great, thank you. Just a few more here. How can you improve an S&OP process when there is so much uncertainty?
That's a good question. Again, you don't know what you don't know. So a lot of the discussion today has been about predictive and proactive actions and processes throughout the process. There isn't a S&OP process in the world that could have predicted COVID and could have managed it. So these are extreme times. But a lot of the things that we've all talked about can minimize the impact of that. We can look at the supply base that we have. We can look at our supply chain network. And as soon as these events occur, we know what we can do with that. So not a great answer, but the S&OP process will help, but it's not going to solve all your problems. But it will give you the visibility and the communication within the organization to deal with events like this as they occur.
Thank you again, Bill. And then another one, do these trends apply more to any particular industry?
They really apply to all industries. The one where there's probably less impact is if you're a service organization. Maybe you provide technology support, and your capacity is in the form of human beings and labor that are going out and performing some service to your customers. So if you're in a localized environment, or you're in one geographical region, the impact of some of these constraints and issues that we've talked about aren't going to hit you as much as your manufacturing product, and you're reliant on components coming in from Asia into the U.S. Those will have a much bigger impact on you.
And I'll add, anecdotally, I certainly agree that it applies pretty much ubiquitously, but I think that we also see lately, some activity in the healthcare, pharmaceuticals, medical devices, as under the current state of disruption and where the needs are. So we certainly see that, and then I think there are a few other industries that are probably particularly challenged right now, but I do think it kind of spans the group.
Yeah, and that's a good point in the healthcare, because the demand is so high.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And also, technology solutions have always been around. What is so different now?
Chris, you want to take that one?
I can fill that one. I think, as we mentioned before, there's a few technologies that are novel, that are actually either less expensive than they have been, or have been accelerated by the fact that the pandemic, basically forced a lot of things that were maybe a little bit more legacy to the sideline. And now we see a lot of that emerging technology, as well as just best practices, coming up to speed very, very quickly out of necessity, honestly. So as I mentioned before, I think that there's some infrastructural things that are going to bring to the forefront a lot of technology that's not nascent by any stretch of the imagination, but still not some of the, not in the mainstream in some cases, like IoT, ubiquitous IoT, and breaking down some of the barriers that that we've had to struggle with around older systems and lack of integration and things of that sort.
Yeah, and I think I heard you say earlier, Chris, you brought up the 5G. I mean, I think that's a technological factor that's, there's a history of having more bandwidth, but it is nearly game changing with the amount of bandwidth there. And then just being able to process more and more quickly this enormous volume of data is, that's something that really is happening live, right? We have more capacity to process more data in near real time or in real time, and the results that you can get back from that, and the actions that you can take, and the modeling that you can do, it just it creates a new level of efficiency and accuracy potential.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And we did have one come through. Are there any manufacturing firms doing this well today? Any benchmark resources to share?
Don't have anything to share, but whoever answered that question, we can get back to you with some examples.
Yeah, I don't have it off the top of my head, but I've certainly seen some reports about per industry who the folks are that have been doing a better job sort of managing margin and inventory turns, especially within their industry. So I think we can point you to a couple of those resources for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. And just one final question here. How successful have companies been with designing products with postponement strategies in mind?
Some better than others. As I said, it's challenging, and it also depends on the nature of the product. One group I worked with, they produced shavers, and the plastic housing around the shaver, which had multiple colors, was incorporated into the assembly of the product. So as a result, there was really no postponement. So it really went to finished good with the color on it. So it took some effort to, from a product design perspective and the assembly as it was running through the line, to be able to separate those colors, those colored covers, before it was assembled fully together. But it took time for them to do that. But again, it's going to vary on the product. Some products will lend themselves better. It depends on the integration and the assembly line in terms of how those products are produced.
All right, thanks, Laura, for the questions, and thanks to you all for your time and your questions. Just a quick touch on some of the takeaways. I think we heard a few of the specific geopolitical hurdles that Chris mentioned to us. That we'll be facing in the upcoming year or so, that are good to keep in mind. We heard that solid S&OP process integration and collaboration, especially that collaboration with suppliers, will help us smooth the ups and downs of what we face ahead of us. We should look for opportunities to simplify and ultimately aim to be as agile as we possibly can, and that digitalization and AI will continue to have some great potential, but will certainly require more work to truly operationalize and see the benefit from. And I think finally, we need to take advantage of the humans in our loops, and that's true whether it's in the AI process or our S&OP processes. And with that, I'll say thank you guys for your time today. We really appreciate it, and thanks much to Bill and Chris for your insights as well.
Thank you.
My pleasure.